This is what I believe most combat athletes should be doing before their fights to improve their performance. And that is primers. Now, if you don't know who I am, I spent over a decade working in professional sport. And one of the things that I used most of my professional athletes and teams was use of a primer before a match, game, competition, whatever it is. I don't see this much within combat sports, probably because of the addition of the weight cut, but there are ways around that, and I'm going to show you how, what, and why around the primer. Now, first is, what is a primer? Essentially, a primer is taking advantage of what has been coined post-activation potentiation enhancement. Essentially, you're doing some form of exercise, whether it be a heavy loaded power exercise or some kind of heavy strength training exercise. And further down the road, you're enhancing performance on a high velocity exercise, usually within 6 to 33 or 48 hours from when you did that previous activity. When we're talking about pure post-activation potentiation enhancement, we're talking within the session. Here we're talking between sessions. So how does this relate to a combat athlete? Well, if you did one of these sessions 24, 48 hours before your fight, or even closer to a fight, you can carry these effects over into your competition. Just to show you an example of this in action, we have a paper, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce his name, Sokos and his colleagues. They essentially did 5 sets of 4 jump squats at 40% 1RM. And what they did is they measured performance 24 hours and 48 hours after performing this very low volume, high intensity training session. They found an increase in counter movement jump, so vertical jump at 24 and 48 hours after. They also found an increase in reactive strength index, which is our ability to quickly get on and off the ground. For example, jumping rope, bouncing around the ring at 24 hours. And this is just one example of the primer in action. So before diving into routine details, we're going to go through over priming strategies and the guidelines to make an effective priming routine. So the first one, using loads between 30 and 95% 1RM. Obviously, this is a very wide range. Between 30 and 40% 1RM is best for ballistic exercises. So we're talking things like Olympic lifts and jumps. And then obviously we can go heavier than that when we're looking at heavy strength training. Typically over 85% 1RM is what you're looking at within some of these priming sessions if you're doing some kind of heavy strength training exercise. Looking at doing multiple sets of low reps, it's more effective than doing a single set. When we're talking low reps, we're talking anywhere between 1 to 5 reps. I typically keep it between 1 and 3 reps. Multiple sets, we're looking at 2, 3, 4 sets. We're talking low volume. Again, same thing when we're talking about sets and reps. Low number of reps, generally low number of sets, and a small number of exercises. Then we go into one of the more important parts of the primer. It is typically task and velocity specific, meaning if you want to prime something of speed, you will do a task that is faster. So for example, if you are trying to potentiate maybe some kind of wrestling shot where you want to improve the speed there, you would do something like a light Olympic lift or a loaded jump. If you wanted to improve the strength side of that or prime the strength side, you would do something slower. You'll do something more strength-based, and that might be, say, a squat or a bench press. Now, when we're doing this as well, we're taking into account the task. So for example, if the exercise or the competition movement is heavily lower body dominant, then the task or the priming strategy should involve some kind of lower body exercise. So if you're doing a upper body exercise to prime a lower body movement, it doesn't quite work that way. Obviously, there are some exceptions as well within this velocity specific area. Obviously, we see things like heavy squats can potentiate sprint performance later on. But typically, we want to stay within similar ranges of velocity and force. Same thing with the task. We want to make sure that it matches. If we want to improve, for example, vertical jump, then we would do some kind of jumping or lower body strength or velocity style task within our primer. And then finally, in terms of timing, the sweet spot tends to be between 6 to 33 hours before your fight. Now, this is going to depend heavily on when your fight is, your training schedule, and your weight cut. Obviously, if you're at the very end of your weight cut, it's probably not the best idea to do something like this. But if you have a longer weigh-in, so if you have a 24-hour weigh-in, you can 100% utilize a primer within that window. As an example, on a super fight card I did not too long ago, I had a morning weigh-in about 9 or 10 a.m. and then the fight card didn't start till 7 p.m. So I had a good 8-9 hour window. So after I weighed in, then I did a very short primer session. It was literally 2 exercises: hang power snatch, hang power clean. Done light for speed. What's good about a primer is if you're an anxious fighter, you get a lot of energy leading up to the fight. This is one strategy you can use to mitigate that. I guess use some of that energy leading into a fight so you're not burning it all through that anxiety. Another point to make is not everyone responds well to doing a primer. Some people don't want to do anything in the 24, 12 hours leading up to a fight, and that is fine. You don't need to do a primer. It's not a one size fits all. Everyone's going to have better performance outcomes because they did this. It's a trial and error thing. So if you are going to trial this, don't trial it before an actual fight. Trial it before, say, sparring sessions or live rolling sessions, something like that, where you can test to see how you feel if you do something like this. So I've developed many different priming routines for various athletes. This is just some examples that you could use as a striker, day of or the day before, depending on weigh-in. It's also going to depend on the lifts that you're used to using. For example, if you don't usually squat, or you don't usually squat heavy, or you don't usually do other variations of squats, then I wouldn't use a half squat here. These are all the exercises that you pick within a primer should be ones that you're used to, you've used, and you're proficient at, and you have no problems with. You don't want to add new exercises to a primer that's just going to create soreness, and you're not going to get the most out of it. So as an example, on the day of, for example, maybe it's 6 to 10 hours before competition, rotational med ball throw. This could be also a rotational punch throw. 3 sets of 2, very light ball, 2 to 3 kilos, which is like 4 to 5 pounds. Then a heavy medicine ball scoop toss, again, 3 doubles. You're going to do something that's more like 6 to 8 kilos, which is more like 12 to 14-ish pounds. And then a moderately loaded jump squat, 30% of your back squat 1RM, 2 to 3 sets of 3 or 2 to 3 sets of 2 to 3. It's a very simple routine. You'll get that done in 15 minutes. If that, you can also add, if you need to do some kind of mobility movement or whatever it is, you can address that within this. 15 to 20 minutes maximum. That's all you need to be in and out. The day before, you can handle a little more volume, but you can also handle a little heavier loads as well. I mean, you can also do this on the day of, depending on how you respond to it. But in general, you can use the same exercises, rotational med ball throw, jump squat. Then we might do a heavy half squat off the pins, 3 sets of 3 at 85% 1RM. Again, you're not getting much range of motion. You won't have much residual fatigue doing something like this. But again, task and velocity specific. With strikers, typically we're looking at more velocity end. However, we can still potentiate some of that with some of the heavier loading, especially when it's done in shorter ranges of motion. So this example is geared more towards the MMA grappling athlete. It's a little more force dominant. It has a lot of the same stuff in there. I'm giving the day of and the day before options. Again, the day before, day of options don't actually really have to change, but I wanted to give you a couple of different looks. So they both start with the jump squat again at 30% 1RM, 2 to 3 sets of 3 reps. On the day of, 6 to 10 hours before competition, you can use the power clean if you're proficient at it. Use kettlebell swing if not. You can use mid ball throws, whatever. 2 to 3 sets of 2, and then finishing with the bench press at 85% 1RM, 2 to 3 sets of 3. Easy, 15, 20 minutes done. On the day before, you can do the same thing. Here I've replaced the power clean with that half squat at 85% 1RM, doing a few more reps and a few more sets. And same thing with the bench press. So you can see here the day before we're doing a little bit more volume, but it's still not enough to carry over fatigue the following day. Now, again, take into account your weight cut, everything else surrounding your training before just plugging like something like this in. Obviously, there's limitations to this as well. Do you even have gym access? Now, I've had issues where we're traveling a lot overseas for various tournaments, competitions. We don't have access to a gym, or we have access to very limited equipment. And I'm going to show you now a primer that I've used that doesn't take much equipment, just takes a partner. So here's an example that I've used with athletes before when we didn't have much equipment. Starting with a jump, so either holding dumbbells if you have dumbbells. If not, bands, you can take bands anywhere with you. Banded jump, 3 to 4 sets of 3 to 5 reps. If you have dumbbells, you can load that at around 30% 1RM. If you can't get there, that's fine. Just having some load is better than none. Secondly, then we have band resisted pogo. So just like jumping rope, but you're resisting with a band, 2 sets of 20. Then we have a partner overcoming isometric push-up. So you're going to get into the bottom push-up position. A partner will push on your back. And you're going to maximally push for 6 seconds trying to extend your arms. Then you can finish, if you do sprints or you're used to them, 10-meter sprint, 2 to 4 reps, 30 to 60 seconds rest. Obviously, if you don't sprint, don't do this. You can do something else, broad jump, some other plyometric exercise, whatever it is. But 10-meter sprint is not going to put you at a risk of injury. Now, this is all well and good. I've given you a bunch of examples of primers you can use that involve high intent, loading, jumping, etc. But what if you don't want to do these things? You don't think you respond well to doing exercise before you compete? Well, I've got some other options that I've also used that involve a pull or involve you using other tactics as well. And I'm going to put some videos up as I talk. So here are a few examples that I've used with athletes when we're not doing a traditional primer. And some of these are used when we had back-to-back days. So if you're competing in a tournament or competition where you have to fight on a Saturday and a Sunday or 2 days in a row, then these are some of the strategies you can use on the morning of the second day as well, which I believe work well and athletes feel good doing. The first one is underwater swimming. So we did this before a championship match. Players played on the Saturday, had to wake up Sunday and play again. So instead of doing a traditional primer when you're sore, broken, whatever it is, we did some form of underwater competition swimming. Start at one end, underwater, hold your breath, swim as far as you can. Now, I don't know how, what, why it works, but it seems to work well. Players enjoyed it. Might be worth trying yourself to see how you feel doing that, whether the breath holding thing somehow potentiates some cardiovascular stuff down the road. I don't know. But the push off the wall is nice. It's high velocity when you're pushing off the wall. It's hard muscular action. And then you're just swimming underwater as far as you can, 1 to 2 times, and you're sorted. Another option is very low intensity, just a pool mobility routine. So you're just literally walking across the pool, doing things like high knee hugs, high foot hugs. You're doing some kind of walking quad stretch, walking hamstring stretch, things like that, just to get moving and out and about. Sometimes if you're not doing anything for an extended period of time, you can feel a little flat. Doing something like this in the morning can help you just get moving and almost like get your day going before competition. Another option when you're doing, say, 2 in a row, this is probably not something I would do if you're just doing, say, a one-off fight on whatever that evening. It's a hot-cold exposure. This is something we used when we had multiple day tournaments. So essentially the morning after doing your matches or fights or whatever, I would do hot-cold exposures, but I would finish on hot instead of finishing on cold. So typically if you're doing hot-cold for recovery, you would finish on cold. Because I didn't want to use this as so-called a recovery stimulus, we finished on hot to essentially keep the blood flowing. So that's another option you can use. Whether these are scientifically backed, I do not think they are, but I have used them and they seem to work well. So something that you can also try. Again, don't just go into your next fight and start implementing some of these things and not know how you react to them. Try them before some sparring sessions, see how you feel. If you feel really good doing some of these, then you can keep using it when you have big competitions and it becomes part of your competition routine. Obviously, the idea of sports psychology and psychology around competition is important, and one of those things is having a routine that gets you into, quote unquote, the zone for your fight. And that can be something like this or a typical primer that you do, almost like a routine of something that you do always when you have a big event. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please go down in the description. There's a link to the Sweet Science of Fighting Underground, has all the training programs, the online community, has all the online courses. You get access to the live Q&As on all the podcasts that we do live going forward. Also, please like, subscribe, share with your friends, comment down below if I've missed anything or you want anything covered on the YouTube channel.